Okay, so today we're going to look at how to do a render in Photoshop. We're going to take a base render from either Rhino or Revit, whatever you use, and some lines from AutoCAD, and generate a nice looking drawing. It'll look good in your portfolio. It'll look nice on a pinup board. So this is kind of the basic idea of what we're going to do. Just applying some basic materials, adding some landscaping, and adding some people. So let's get started. What we're going to do is go ahead and start by opening a new Photoshop file. So we're going to go to File, New. For this one, we're going to make sure it's in inches, and just for the sake of showing you what to do, we're just going to make it 24 by 36. So width is 36, the height is 24, and I like to bring the resolution up to about 300 just to make sure when it prints nice and clear. Now that we have our blank document, we're going to open up our base render and our lines and go ahead and bring those in to Photoshop. So to do that, we're going to go to File, we're going to hit Open, go to whatever file you have everything stored in. I'm going to go ahead and grab the render first, and then if you hold down the Control button and click another file, you can bring them both in at the same time so you don't have to go through everything twice. So I'm bringing them in as PDFs, which is something you can do when you're saving your lines from AutoCAD. Save them as a PDF, just plot them to the PDF. That way when you bring it in, Adobe likes that much better than trying to deal with everything else strange that AutoCAD does. Okay, so we have the lines in now. So we're going to go drag this off to the side. Let's get our blank one open. We're going to just use our little dragging tool here, the top tool, the move tool, and we're going to our lines from AutoCAD. We're going to drag, and we're just going to drag that right into our new document. Okay, and then we can go ahead and close that. We don't need that line work open anymore. Just hit no. All right, so now you can see we have the lines in there. Before I bring the other render in, we're going to go ahead and get everything straightened out here. So see how the line work is perpendicular to where we need it. What we're going to do is hold down Control and T, and then you should have a little bounding box that pops up around your drawing. We're going to zoom out a little so we can grab the corners. You want to move it until you see that little rotate arrow. See, I can get it to be diagonal, straight. See, there we go, straight, or that little radius tool. We want to be able to rotate the image. So to do it at a 90-degree angle, we're just going to hold down the Shift button as we rotate, and that'll allow us, it's kind of like using ortho in Rhino or AutoCAD. When we get it to where we want it, just go ahead and let go of the Shift and of the mouse on the page, and then just click the little checkbox up at the top here. Just let it do its thing. Don't get impatient. All right. So our line work in. But now see, when you bring in, if you've taken your lines from a Rhino model, it's going to bring in the color of the Rhino model layers. So like, you know, you obviously don't want lime green, red, that bluish color. You don't want that in your final render. So what we're going to do to fix that is go up, and we're going to go to Image. We're going to go to Adjustments, Saturation. This little box pops up. What we're going to do is we're going to drag the saturation all the way down to the far left, and that'll make it black and white. So now all of our colors are gone. We're going to hit OK, and that's adjusted. So now let's go ahead and bring in our render. We're going to go back up to File, Open again. We're going to grab the render, hit Open. Okay, so now we're going to get this into our other drawing the same way we took the AutoCAD lines in. Just going to drag it off to the side. Make sure this is our background image. Use our Move tool, click onto this drawing, and just drag it behind. All right, we can just go ahead and close that. Now, first thing you're going to notice, obviously, is that these are at two completely different scales. And so how are you going to get it to be the right scale? What you want to do first, you want to make sure that your render is behind your line work. So to change that, you can come over to your layers, your little layers area, and you're going to drag the layer you want underneath the lines to underneath. All right, now see over here, you can see that the lines have popped up over top of the render now. So before we get too much further, let's go ahead and name our layers. That way we don't get lost when we start adding more things like trees and people and all that. So we're going to change here where it says layer 2, you just double click. You can highlight that, and then we're just going to call that base render. You can call it whatever you want to. So and we're going to do the same thing for layer 1. I'm just going to call that line work. All right, so now make sure you have the base render selected before you do this next step. Make sure you select that layer over there. What you're going to do is you're going to try to line up 2 points. So I'm going to try to line up, and I'm zooming just by either scrolling with my scroll wheel, or sometimes if you hold control and then just hit the plus button, that also zooms. But what I'm going to do is line up these 2 corners right here. So you can use your mouse, and you can also use your little arrow pad on your keyboard. Once those 2 corners are lined up, if you hit Control T, that gets us back to that transform mode. Now what you're going to do is, if you just transformed from this point, it would transform from the center point. So, you'd be scaling it and then moving it around to try to line it up and then scaling it and doing that over and over again. So to make that a little easier, what you're going to do is hold down the Alt button, and then you're just going to select that point that we lined up right in the middle. Now that is your point of movement, like that's going to be your center point. So now we can zoom out again. To transform it, you're just going to hold down Shift, Alt, and you're going to grab it until you see that little diagonal in the corner. And see how it's controlling it from that point? You're just going to drag it outwards until it's just about the right size. Just get it as close as you can, and we can go in and make little tweaks in just a second. All right, so that looks pretty good right there. So we're just going to zoom in, make sure it's where we want it to be. Everything looks pretty lined up here. So when you're satisfied with where everything's at, go ahead and hit the little check mark again. All right, so now we've got lines and we've got our base render. Next step, let's get some sky in there. Make it a little prettier in the background. So first thing we're going to want to do is change the opacity on our base render. You don't want it full darkness because then it gets a little harder, as you can see, to see some of the line work. It's going to make it harder to apply textures later. So just make sure your base render layer is selected. You're going to come over here to that lower right hand area where it says opacity. You're going to click that little over arrow and just drag it down until it's about where you want it to be. So you don't want it too light, but you don't want it too dark either. I usually bring it down to around 60–65% depending on how the render looked in the light. Okay, so now we have the base render and the line work lined up. We've got the opacity changed. Now to add the sky, what we're going to do is, you can see we have all this gray area kind of around here. Let's go ahead and delete that before we do anything else. Okay, so what we're going to do to add the sky is we're going to go up and we're going to open our texture. You can find these textures online anywhere. Usually just Google the texture, just type in sky texture. It'll bring up a bunch of seamless textures, and try to pick the highest resolution one you can. Everything to look nice and crisp. So to get that sky in there, I've already saved the texture. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm just going to scroll down until I see my sky. There it is. We're going to open that up. We're going to bring it into our drawing the same way we did before. Just using that Move tool. Just drag it in and drop it down. All right, same thing as the base render. This sky looks really tiny. So just to give you an idea of kind of the scale of this project, this is about half of a block in New York City that we're working with here. So this is a pretty big project. So obviously the sky is going to be, the clouds aren't going to be huge in the background of this, but obviously they're not this tiny either. So what we're going to do is we're going to just transform it the same way we did before, using the Control and the T, holding down the Shift just to keep it proportional, and using our control points and dragging it out until we get it to about the size we'd like it. Now, something that's important when you're thinking about where to position your sky is you don't want to fill it up with clouds, and you don't want to fill it up with blue either, because then it kind of gets lost in the background of what you're doing. So let's go ahead and click the check button. And you can kind of see a little bit where that's going to sit, and you can just kind of drag it around until it's about where you'd like it. Just look at the area that's right around the buildings here. Maybe have a little cloud sticking up here. That'd be nice right about there. Okay. So now that that's where we'd like it, let's go ahead and play with the colors on it. Again, the same thing as before with the base render. You don't want the colors to be too bright, especially with the render we're going for. If we look back at the original, notice how the sky is just kind of there for a little bit of context to kind of ground the model. But it's not like we're putting a lot of emphasis on, hey, this is a really pretty sky. So just keep that in mind. That things that are subtle are good too in renders. So we're going to change the opacity first, same way we did before, using that little dragging bar in the corner. Just pull it back. Let's bring it back to about 50% here. And it all depends on what sky you use, so this is something you'll have to play around with. Now that we have that, we can also go, I like to go into Image, go to Adjustments. We'll bring that Hue and Saturation tool back up. And I like to tone down the saturation just a little bit. When things are too bright or too blue or too red or anything like that in your drawing that aren't part of the main drawing, it takes away focus from your actual work, and that's obviously the last thing we're trying to do. So just dial back that saturation just a little bit, not as far as we did with the base render. I'm sorry, not as far as we did with the line work, but tone it back a little bit. Then we just hit OK. All right, so now we have this sky, but it's over top of all of our line work and our rendering. It looks pretty rough right now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to trim kind of around the buildings. So what we're going to do is make sure that you are on any layer. You can be on any layer and do your lines. So what we're going to do first, though, is we're going to actually use this little eye. Click that little eye icon, and that turns off a layer. So I just turned off the sky so we can see everything behind it nice and clearly. Now we're going to use a tool called the polygonal lasso. It's over here. It's the third tool down. If you don't see the polygonal lasso right away, it's going to be in the third set down of tools. You just right click and see you have a couple different options there. We're going to use the polygon like I said. We're just going to start tracing our buildings. So as you can see, these are some context buildings back here. So I'm going to start tracing up here because I want to leave the context in. It again helps ground the model. So I'm just going to trace around these buildings really quickly. All right, and once you've kind of gotten around the edges of your building, you can just kind of close it off. It doesn't matter how you do that. So we're going to fade this out in a little bit. All right, now that eye again, turns it back on. Now, well, this is the sky that we want to keep, right? So we're going to select, and then you can just hit the delete button. So now it's selected everything opposite of that interior area. So now we've got that deleted. Okay, and all we have to do is hit Control and D. That deselects everything. So now we have a little bit of sky in here, but obviously we want to fade it out. Obviously these lines over here are going to end up getting faded out later, so we can go ahead in with our eraser tool. It's over here on your toolbar on the left side. If you don't see your eraser pop up, again, just right click, and then you'll see there's a couple different eraser options. You just want the standard eraser tool. Now we don't want to completely erase everything. See, if I do that, it kind of erases everything. So we're just going to undo that. What we're going to do is kind of fade it out. So we're going to make sure that in our brush style, we have one of these soft edged brushes. If you do a hard edged brush, it's a little more difficult to control everything. So always pick that soft edged brush. We're going to turn it back just a little bit. You still want a decently big brush tool. It'll make everything a lot easier. It'll fade out a little nicer. Then we're going to go over to our opacity and our flow. Now by changing these two things in conjunction, we can change the amount of material that it takes away each time. It's kind of like erasing softer or harder. So we want our opacity down. I like to bring it down to around 30% for this. And then the flow, I like to bring it down to around 20%. This is something you just kind of have to play with. You'll get your own intuition about it. And then we're just going to start clicking, making sure again that we're on our sky layer. And just click a bunch of times, and we're going to start fading stuff out. If you notice it's going a little more slowly than you'd like, you can play with the opacity and the flow. All right, so now that we've got our sky where we want, you can see we still have this gray background from our render. So what you're going to do is grab your polygonal lasso tool. You're going to go in, you're going to trace that same shape again. You could have also deleted it before. Sometimes I like to wait just to make sure that I get the horizon right with the sky. But you're just going to go in, trace your buildings again really quickly. Same thing as the sky, you want to make sure you close your loop. Right back to the start. We're going to change our layer to that base render layer. And just hit delete. Now I've got rid of that gray, and we have a nice sky there. So let's go ahead and before we forget, we're going to rename this to sky. So next I'm going to be adding some material to this. So in our building it was Prodema, which Prodema is a wood material. We're going to add that to the majority of the parts of this building. Over here there's also an area where there's going to be some metal. If we look back at our original, you can kind of see what's going on. There's a little bit of glass, the Prodema, some metal here and some metal here. And then this wall is made of a stone material. So back to our drawing. What we're going to do is first we're going to go, same thing as before, we're going to do the file, open. We're going to open our texture, which I just called Prodema texture. Find it on the internet. Try to find something that works correctly for your project. There's a million different options. So we're going to make that small again. We're going to use our move tool and we're going to drag it onto our drawing. And close that. So now you can see that it is really tiny again. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control T. We're going to transform it. We're going to get it close to the size we need it. But then if you notice, there's a little bit of texturing in this wood, and we want that texture to show up on our render. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Edit. Down here, there's a Transform button. We're going to use that little menu off to the side, and we're going to use Distort. Now what you can do with that is it allows you to control each corner point individually. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag it around until it fits onto our drawing. Now there's still going to be some trimming we have to do with this, so don't try to use this as a shortcut to avoid trimming, or you're going to end up with kind of a model that looks a little sloppy around the edges. This is just kind of to help you get the correct perspective, just to make sure everything's lined up and even. So once you have it dragged to where you'd like, you can go ahead and hit the check mark. Now it looks like we actually did pretty good on this corner, but if you'll notice, we missed some edges here. So to trim that up, we're just going to use our polygonal lasso tool, and we're going to trim it up. And now we have our Prodema, our first side that is Prodema. Okay, so we're just going to repeat that throughout the rest of the Prodema areas. Make sure you always name your layers as you go. Okay, so now that we have the Pro Dema on, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and adjust all of the hues, because right now it looks really monotoned, so we want to bring a little bit of thought about the sun and texture into it, so it doesn't look like one continuous sheet. We want it to look like an actual three-dimensional thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to select each layer individually. We'll start with the first one. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we can change the saturations, we can change the opacity. This is one of those things that's kind of up to you for preference. I like to make them a little bit lighter. I still like to see the darkness of the render behind it, because keep in mind that the render already has the correct shading and shadows on it. So just kind of keep in mind what opacity you bring everything down to, and then you can kind of adjust that based on what you need. So I'm starting around 66%. And so like this one is going to be a little bit more in the dark because of where, or I'm sorry, this one's going to be a little lighter because of where we have the sun. So I want to reflect that. But I'm going to do that a little differently on this particular panel, which I'll show you in just a second. So we're just going to go through and we're going to adjust all of those. Keep in mind that constricted places, even if they do have a lot of sun exposure, constricted places are going to be a little more dark than open places like this face here. So this area is going to be a little darker.